Welcome to Scroll Ideas, a podcast from Scroll where every episode we'll take an idea that we think is vital for the country and debate it and discuss it and break it down with a particularly brainy guest. And you'll be doing all of this with me, your host, Shoaib Daniyal. This episode we have with us Ruchi Gupta, who back in the day was a strategy consultant at McKinsey in the United States. But then I guess she had a bit of a Swadesh moment and she came back to India. She worked on advocacy for 5 or 6 years. She did RTI work, she did right to work advocacy. She also worked with Arvind Kejriwal for a bit here. And after that, she joined, just before the 14 election, she joined the Congress party. And she was the National Joint Secretary for the Congress. She was the national in charge for the Congress's student wing, the NSUI, which is quite a powerful group within the Congress party, as people familiar with the party would know. She's left the Congress now. She's currently with a think tank. She's the executive director of a think tank. She's also a columnist, which is how I best actually know her. She's a thoughtful columnist. So a lot of political commentary in India is to do with the power of politics. It's what he said, she said, which is all great, and I enjoy a little bit of masala and a little bit of scandal, as anyone does. So that's one part of political commentary. The other is often political commentary is often this excoriating sort of criticism of politics. It's how Indians will say, he's doing politics with the issue. Sometimes I even heard politicians say he's doing politics with the issue, and it just blows my mind. That's literally your job to do politics. So it's used as a negative thing. But what I find refreshing in Ruchi's commentary, she doesn't do that. She treats every issue analytically, and she tries to break down and go one beyond the surface level of politics. In fact, she has a Substack which we will plug later on, which you will go and read her work. I find it very useful for my work as a political journalist. Because unlike a lot of other people who would treat politics as a negative thing, I actually have the polar opposite view. I think politics is extremely important. Societies really can't survive without politics. In fact, I think we are human because, to really push it, we are human because we are political. And, a lot of time Indian politicians get a lot of flack for what they do, and they should, because they hold power. But a lot of credit to where India is today should also go to its politicians. I mean, this is one of the reasons I think that one of the factors that separates us from our neighborhood. So you might not like them day to day, but they do a function and they do keep the country going. And we're going to try and unpack how they do it and what they do. Welcome to Ideas, Ruchi.
Thank you for having me, Shoaib.
So before we jump into the hard stuff of politics, I want to understand how was your experience coming back from the US back to India? You grew up in Delhi, but how was your experience working in advocacy, and then you went to politics, and how was it different from your earlier, more boring job?
First of all, thank you for having me. Coming back to India was really, in some ways, an eye-opening moment for me. I come from a middle-class family, very sheltered, youngest child, apple of my parents' eye. So I really never got a chance to see India as India is, right? And you're also very sort of involved with your own aspirations, your own desires. Once I came back to India, and I had some time in McKinsey, and McKinsey is very plush, right? It's a very plush job.
Mm-hmm.
You get to travel, you get to stay in 5 stars, etc. So I think a little part of that aspirational part of me was sort of satiated for a bit. And then I got a chance to come back to India actually with McKinsey on a study which later became the Teach for India project. And I really got to see India the way India is, the poverty, people, just, the way India is in many ways, outside of my own aspirations, outside of my own desires and involvement. So coming back to India and then working with movements, the RTI movement, the Right to Work movement, it was excellent. I got to travel, I got to go to villages. I stayed in a village in Rajasthan for some time, and actually it was very interesting. I would go out every month, every day. And there was someone who would take me to all these houses, right? Who would act as an intermediary between me, and I would ask questions. I had some very harebrained project at that time where I wanted to understand about the economy of the village. So I would go out every day, and there would be Mohanba from MKSS. He would go with me, and then we would go to every house, and then we would ask them कि आपने कहाँ पे कैसे पैसे खर्च किए, what was your monthly budget, etc., etc. And that understanding, my project went nowhere. It was a very harebrained project. But that going around the village, talking to people about their daily expenses, their daily life, how they're spending money, how do they respond to questions, when they lie, when they don't lie, those sorts of things, when you triangulate things are not adding up. That gave me an understanding, which I still rely on to this date. That ability to just spend time in the village, walking around, talking to people, understanding things. That really helped me, and that was an eye-opening experience. And then, of course, from MKSS and NCPRI, I went on to the Congress Party, and then I got to travel the country and really meet people everywhere, right? And that was, I think, one of the best experiences of my life. Really getting to understand your country, getting to know your country. So many of us just never get that opportunity to be able to travel somewhere, right? And there's something, um, you can go to the remotest village. It's like some chotu village. It's got only one little kirana store with those little plastic things hanging, and you will be able to find a Congress worker, right? And that was really quite exciting. Just this understanding that how people are able to connect to some very amorphous idea, and how that connectivity sort of stays on. What are the issues that people get excited about? How do you talk to them? All of that has just been the most exciting experience still to this date of my life.
So what I like, I mean, I agree with you. I think I mean, I'm not work with any party, but every time I report, I'm always amazed that the work parties put in. Actually, So this is something that I want to unpack with you. Like when we talk of democracy, when we talk of politics, very often parties are almost like not even directly spoken of in the architecture of politics. We talk of leaders, but how important is the actual like brass tacks, the organizational muscle of a party in upholding what we think of as democracy in India?
You can't have democracy without political parties, because at the very basic, political parties are the institutional intermediaries for that political process. आप इलेक्शन में आप किसको वोट डाल रहे हो? यू वोटिंग फॉर अ पार्टी, राइट? सो इफ देयर इज नो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी, they cannot be representative democracy. So that's at the very basic. But also in a country like India, there's such diversity of views, of opinions, of lived experiences, socio-economic groups, etc. That diversity, how do you bring that diversity into some kind of coherence? And what is that platform that would provide that coherence? And that is a political party, right? A political party is that platform where you can collaborate to be able to also, I don't know, hammer out some sort of consensus on issues. It doesn't
Right.
have to be a consensus where there's a lot of deliberation, but it does provide that framework to hammer out a consensus on a range of issues. The second thing, on a political party is political parties are necessarily top down. There is this idea that political parties are supposed to be some sort of a bottoms up process, right? But actually, that's not true. Political parties are always started with a vision, and it's top down mobilization. And we are all sort of attaching to that vision. That vision may obviously evolve with time, but that vision is always a top down vision. Where someone says that we believe in, let's say, a secular plural India, and hence there will be one political party, or I believe in a Hindutva, vision, and that's another top-down party, right? It's never started from like a bottom-up thing. It's always a top-down thing where a bunch of people come together and then they mobilize the electorate around that vision. So in terms of A, being able to hammer out a consensus, and B, being able to mobilize people around a particular vision for either a state or a country, there can be no other framework other than the political party.
This thing that you spoke of vision, like one of the criticisms against some political parties in India right now is that they don't have vision. For example, if you look at I don't know the BRS right now. So there's a criticism against the BRS that it's just a family-run party. It has no vision. How would you put that into this theory of the Indian party? What is driving the BRS? I mean, it obviously represented Telangana statehood, but today, is there like an attenuation of the idea of a party in this from this theoretical framework in India?
You know, I don't think there can be a political party without a vision. But how? So at some core, there'll always have to be some vision. Otherwise, how is a political party going to come to power? Right? There'll have to be some way that they're mobilizing the electorate around some idea. The problem I think that happens is that once you come to power, the political economy, the way it plays out, and how you exercise that vision and that dialectic that happens with the political party, the leadership, and the people, that sometimes can attenuate your vision, and how you are able to articulate that vision. Why political parties then become family driven sometimes, it's also because that political economy, there's a lot of mistrust. How do you exercise power? Who do you delegate power to? All of those issues play some sort of a role in why political parties either become very closed or they become a little bit more expansive. But I wouldn't agree that no party has a vision.
Right.
What can happen is whether or not that vision is shared broadly with the electorate or not. And there, I think a lot of political parties, they start out with an idea, they come to power on the back of that idea, but then they're in that exercise of power and in being able to consolidate that power, right? Because there's also a lot of intra-party issues. That vision sometimes gets a little narrower, and it doesn't have that broad scoping that is required, to be able to constantly maintain that connectivity. Mr. KCR and I don't want to speak too much about Southern politics because of my understanding of Southern politics is a little bit lesser than North India politics just because of the language barrier. But he clearly had a vision, right? He had a vision for Telangana, and he came to power on the back of that vision. And then he also came back on the second term. But I think in wanting to expand his mandate to a more national, so from TRS they became BRS. And then they also became too reliant on the bureaucracy, which is a thing that many state parties do. They become too reliant on the bureaucracy, and then it just becomes a disbursement of schemes as opposed to that larger vision. And that idea that having a separate state would lead to a certain kind of development, clearly that did not fully transpire, right? Because some of the schemes were not very well implemented. And there, that feedback loop somehow got broken, and they became too reliant on the bureaucracy and their own understanding of. I think that's what's happened. But would I say that they lack vision or that any political party lacks vision? Not, I wouldn't agree. It's just that whether that vision is more broadly shared with the electorate or not.
So this bureaucracy thing is very interesting because I think this is now across all states where it's usually very few bureaucrats who will acquire a lot of power. I mean, one of the most interesting things that I have seen as a journalist from ground up is one of the reasons why chief ministers are so tempted to do this is because actually going through party channels and going through government channels, like ideally you would do through ministers and so on and so forth, or you do through party units, is such a complex task. Because a party on the ground could be, like you said, the Congress party has a worker in every village, and it's this huge organization.
As a supporter,
not a worker, as a supporter in every village. This task becomes so huge, and I would like to also connect it. You've written this fantastic blog or article where you said that a political party is not a company, and this is something that has always struck me. These comparisons, it's literally like comparing an ant to an elephant. I mean, a political party is huge, right, in terms of its scope, just in terms of the number of people that it directly has as volunteers or its supporters. I mean, if you look at India, then obviously we're looking at, this obviously numbers which don't really exist anywhere. For example, the BJP claims to be the world's largest party. I don't know the exact facts of that, but it very well might be true just because India is the world's largest country, right? So if you're the world's largest party, if you're the largest country, the world's largest party, you will be, unpack some of the stuff for us. For example, if there's a leader, if there's a central leader sitting in a state capital, and there's a district unit that is underperforming, is not performing as per how the high command wants. What can the high command do to discipline that unit? Can it just fire it? What are the tools available for that? How does that power sort of flow back between the center and the Mufassil?
So it depends on what we mean when we say that a district unit is not performing, right? Is a district unit not performing as per a particular faction, or is the district unit not performing just altogether? They're not
Right.
doing any meetings, they're not doing any work at all. If they're not doing any work at all, right? Let's say your district president has become defunct for some reason. Maybe he's too old, or he's not interested, he's lost the interest, whatever. They can certainly be changed, right? I think what I meant by a political party is not a company is where district units or various lower level leaders, or even higher leaders, they are part of a faction and they're part of that intra party factional battle, right, for power. There it is very difficult to get rid of people,
Right.
right? What do you do? And every political party will have a disciplinary committee, right? But let's say if you're topmost, let's say one of the chief ministerial candidates, or someone who's in a position, that level of, they go against the party line. What can you do, right? Short
Yeah.
of if you throw them out of the party, and you may not necessarily have the power also to. Let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to throw them out of the party. It will have obviously some consequence
Right.
on your party's state unit, right? They may take away a large chunk of your vote. They may go to the other side. There'll be some MLAs who will be attached to that to that individual. They may be able to get together. It happened, right, in Madhya Pradesh, where Mr. Sindhya controlled a certain number of MLAs, and he just went to the BJP, right? And the idea that you can certainly make someone else the district president, if that person is not working. But if that person is not listening to one side of the party or one faction of the party, then taking action against that district president is actually tantamount to trying to take action against the faction he or she belongs to. And that faction will exert his or her power, right? And it depends on the central authority. Do they want to pick that fight with that particular faction in the state, and what are the pros and cons of picking a fight? And we've seen this happen repeatedly, where the central unit is able to really exert its will, which we are seeing in the BJP, is where the leadership, the central leadership, is also able to bypass the state leadership and go directly, right? There they are able
To the electorate, basically.
to the electorate, right? Where that state leader, in some ways, they don't have the kind of powers to be able to really flex their muscle against the central leadership. And there they are able to. So usually it's all about, what is the balance of power between the state leadership and the central leadership that will decide whether or not you can fire one. I mean, fire is not the right word, right? Because they don't necessarily hold a job.
Right.
But whether or not you can get rid of someone, it's really about the balance of power between the two.
So, I mean, basically, it's not right to just see this guy as an individual, but he's rather a representative of supporters, voters, and so on. That's how political parties would look at a local leader, basically.
Yeah.
So, getting rid of him just doesn't mean getting rid of, Ram Kumar. It means getting rid of 10,000 votes, could be.
Yeah, and it's not that even if it's a very low level functionary, but that low level functionary, the question is where is he or she deriving their authority from, right? if they are being indisciplined, are they deriving their authority from a larger leader at the state level or at the national level? And if they are, then what action can you take against them? Because it's ultimately proxy action against that particular leader.
Right.
So that's the question. That is, it's not necessarily about how many votes that individual is controlling, but whether you have the ability to pick on those fights with those leaders within your own party.
Right, it's very interesting. One element that I'd like to plug into the discussion is, because I have seen how this changes the party dynamic, is how political consultants work. So political consultants nowadays in India are ubiquitous. Uh, I mean, I was reporting on the recent round of state elections, and I traveled to Telangana. Not only did parties have political consultants, but very often individual MLAs had kids to help them with data. So what was done at a very informal level, where you would get a guy who knows the local area well, would do these caste and community samikarans. So you would get a kid who is not even from Telangana, who's but he's a smart kid. He knows his way around at least Excel, and so this was ubiquitous. How are political consultants, in your opinion, changing parties, and do you think that's a good thing?
So we should distinguish between the kids who are running around with local
Right.
MLA candidates, right? Because their job is necessarily to, it's a more of a logistical and administrative role that they
True.
play. That how are you going to fight your election in terms of your booth management and your getting the message out and that sort of thing, right? It's a very narrow scope. The political consultant that is sitting at the state level or at the national level, right? There they're deciding on the strategy, they're deciding on the actual campaign, on the messaging. Sometimes they'll say that we'll do surveys, and they will also then be part of candidate selection. They will say कि हम आपको survey करके देंगे and this candidate has a lot of anti-incumbency or this candidate is better. And typically, what happens that the consultant reports to two or three leaders within the party, right? So what happens is that having a consultant come in and allegedly on the back of objective data that they are giving to you, they totally bypass the entire party organization, right? And it's impossible then to really, that back and forth that is important in a party, because parties are also negotiating that internal power structure. These political consultants come and they totally bypass that. How are they doing their surveys? They may be doing their survey very well, but that methodology is not clear. On the back of that survey, sometimes the leadership may decide to get rid of some candidate, and it's not clear that it would necessarily be on the back of the survey or they just want to get rid of the candidate. So it creates a certain level of opacity in the party mechanism and the party structure by bringing a consultant. The second thing is that these consultants tend to be very ideologically agnostic. Now, if you were to see a political party as a platform for a certain vision and ideology, then to have someone who's come in who's totally ideology agnostic, who अभी आज इस पार्टी में है, कल दूसरे पार्टी में है, कल तीसरे पार्टी में है, right? That undermines the party's real purpose of propagating a certain ideology. And because they're so agnostic, what is the methodology that these particular consultants they come up with? It's always some sort of a welfare scheme that they want to propagate, right? Because they don't have that ideology which would be able to think in terms of a more ideological vision for the state. So what will be their method? It will be a template, just a standard template, when we've seen this repeatedly. There will be one state leader, right? Whoever's brought them in. And on the back of that state leader, they will run a bunch of schemes. कोई 5 guarantee, कोई ये welfare scheme, कोई वो welfare scheme. And we've seen this, like Prashant Kishore has done this for every state election that he's done. Yeah. That there is one leader, and then on the back of that leader, so captain in Punjab, Mamta in West Bengal, so on and so forth. Right? So there is no ideology behind that consultant. So I think that overall, my personal feeling is that they really, they brought in a lot of opacity in the way the party functions and distributes tickets or even decides on how to move forward with certain kinds of schemes, or the manifesto for the election. Two, they just completely bypass the party organization, and I think that depletes the party organization and it hollows out the party organization. It cuts that intra-party negotiation that is so important, and what I mentioned is one of the jobs of a political party, to be able to create that collaboration and consensus building. And third, I think that they really get rid of the ideology of the party. Right, every single party is now one leader with some 5 campaign promises around that. Right, so ये वाला leader को select करो या वो वाला, it's a very personalized way of doing politics, which goes against the idea of democratic elections around a vision and around the party framework. So I'm particularly averse to the idea of consultant. This is not to say that professionalism is not required in fighting elections, right? But there's nothing to stop a party from being professional
on its own.
On its own. You can have these people internally, right? You can go and get data internally. There can be a data collection. There can be all of those things that a consultant does can happen in-house. There's no need whatsoever to outsource it. The only reason it's outsourced is because it helps the leader consolidate power. Otherwise, there's no reason why this cannot be done internally.
In fact, just to add to your point, I mean, I'm not going to take any names, but from what I understand, is that in certain instances, consultants have actually far even outstripped their role as campaign managers and taken up what would be called governance functions, right? Because the campaign becomes so important, right? So in the previous 6 months, things that a minister or a bureaucrat would do, they are doing it informally in some cases. So that's something that I've seen happen, which truly is remarkable, because this person has no authority or mandate to do this. I mean, any way you cut it, legal or democratically. But for whatever reason, I think political leaders think that that person is so important to their chances of getting re-elected that they're going to throw the sink at them. Yeah.
I don't know if they think that this person is so important to their. I really think that this is largely about the intra-party power tussle. Otherwise, there's nothing stopping. I mean, these are not most political leaders, right? They're very smart. You don't get to come and fight your way to the top without having some amount of intelligence and understanding. And there's nothing stopping from people being professional inside a political party. I think it's largely about wanting to consolidate power by keeping everything in your hand, as opposed to being able to disperse it within the party organization.
I completely agree. I mean, I covered the previous assembly elections in Bengal, and I think Trinamool, as is well known, had IPAC, and that was a huge centralizing force for, I think, Mamata Banerjee. So this really undercut the local units of the Trinamool, who suddenly, I think there was they had a back and forth with Calcutta, where they would say, we're going to give you something, you give me something, and all that. And one of the most important things, they actually gave Calcutta was information. Because Mamata had no way of knowing what is going on in a village unless a local leader told her what is going on in the village. So she had the police, but police at the end of the day is not a great tool. Parties very often, it's another tool. They usually, I think they use both tools. They use the state, but they use the party. But I think this really helped bypass a lot of the local units, and they were suddenly powerless. And I think welfare added to that, because everybody, the vote suddenly became about what Mamata is giving versus what Modi is giving. People don't even take the name of the Trinamool Congress and the BJP.
Yeah.
That's also too big. So people would almost individualize. They would say that this house was given to me by Modi, or like sometimes the Trinamool would try and claim this. It's a very interesting sort of fight. The Pradhan Mantri Gram Awas Yojana in Bengal is known as Banglar Badi. Like they've changed the name. They say half the state fund, so it's known as West Bengal House, Bengal House. So it's kind of complex to know who's giving to the house, right? So because I mean, I guess technically it's both because it's 50. I don't know exact breakup, but it's half some center, some state. So anyway, so there's this stuff. So everybody is sort of individually. In fact, you can see it in the names. Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. Like it's Pradhan Mantri is almost personally giving this thing, and then states would call it something. Is there? This is. I think this is a fascinating dynamic and something that is not commented on. Do you think there'll be some sort of a backlash to this? Like, will there be a time when a party that actually has a robust local unit culture, do better at the polls than somebody who has a consultant? Because right now the thinking is now, whether it's right or wrong, is that a consultant is very important if you want to do well in an election. And I mean, it's a tough thing to. I don't know what I would do if I was fighting an election. Would I go in without a consultant, and risk losing if I lost? So do you think there'll be a backlash against that? Do you think this is making parties worse at fighting elections? Forget about the ideology for a bit. The short term thing.
See, the BJP, Prashant Kishore started initially with the BJP, right? But when he wanted to then go beyond his ambit, there was some sort of a dissonance and then he left. But the BJP obviously has a professional election machine internally. But they also have some sort of ideological agenda which is distributed through not just the BJP but also RSS and the hundreds of organizations and chotu things that come out of the RSS fountainhead, right? So there's again, I want to say that the problem is not in having professional expertise within the political party to give feedback, and actually that's very important. And you may want to have independent sources of feedback. That's also fine. The problem is when that becomes your whole and soul, and there is no party infrastructure, to be able to supplement that, and that becomes your only sort of pivot. Right. So that backlash, I don't know so much about backlash, right? Who's going to provide the backlash if your party unit becomes defunct? And your various district units, etc., they all sort of lose their vigor. Who's going to provide that backlash? But parties will suffer. The parties that do not have a more expansive ideological agenda, who do not have strong organizations, they will suffer. That is the larger point. It's not about whether internally there will be a backlash. There can be some dissonance, there cannot be some dissonance. And we are seeing that.
But this means, so if it's just going to be a suffering without electoral consequences, then what is the driver for a leader?
There are electoral consequences. There's obviously electoral consequences, right? If you are only going to see, we saw this with TRS. TRS started off as a very ideological party which had a very strong political plan, which was Telangana. Right? And Telangana was meant to be, because if you have a new state, you will have better development, better opportunities. Over the term, their political plank sort of became a little less important, and they became more of a state, right, in governance and bureaucracy. So that party suffered electoral defeat. We are seeing with the Congress Party. Congress Party ran a very competent, in some ways, it ran a very competent government in Rajasthan. Even after the Kanhaiya murder happened, the Taylor's murder happened, right? The party could have gone down a path of allowing a sort of a communal thing, but the chief minister really held the ideological line. He also, during COVID, during various things, you can see that he was a very, very able administrator. But the party held on to its vote share also. Right. But it's the BJP that increased its vote share. They increased its vote share, right? And the party was unable to give that political plank. Right. So even though, and the party ran a competent campaign also, I think. But because there was no political plank and there was a very small 2% vote share, which would have been, if they had a political plank that could have, it would have helped them surmount that. So simply governance alone will not help you, and then relying, let's say you're in power, but once you're out of power, so the governance ka bhi wo plank khatam ho jata hai, right? You don't have that, and then if you're only relying on your consultant with your 5 guarantees, or four guarantees or some sort of a, this leader plus some panoply. I think when you don't have a strong organization, you don't have a political plank, you're really going to suffer. And suffer, I mean, electorally, you are going to suffer.
Do you think that to sort of to go down to carry on with this discussion, do you think that that is a major reason for why the Congress is suffering, that it's unable to push an ideological line properly to large numbers of Indians?
Yeah, so the Congress party. So let's separate the Congress party at the national level and Congress party at the state level, right? State level, I think that the Congress party is still putting up a fairly good fight in various states, and we're seeing that in the vote shares that the party is being able to hold on the back of state level leaders. At a national level, if you're a national party, then you have to have a national. You're being a Congress party supporter must have some sort of a parallel with the national identity that I see myself as an Indian. So if I'm an Indian and I'm also a Congress party supporter, I must stand for some sort of a vision for my country.
Right.
Earlier the Congress party did have that, right? Being a Congress party person also stood for nation building in a certain way. We were the party that was a repository of the freedom movement and all that halo that came with that. But over the years, there was this attrition, an inevitable attrition unless you keep on renewing what it means to be a Congress party person and what it means, what is your vision for the national government. And there I think that the party has, because UPA 1 and UPA 2, there were, I again think that there was, despite the corruption scandals, it was a competent government, right? The growth rates were good. 140 million people were pulled out of poverty. There were large numbers of welfare schemes. A lot of infrastructure that is now being used by the BJP was put in place. Aadhaar, DBT, all of those things. All of that was there. But the party did not have a very strong political plank. It did not have that conversation with the electorate on an ongoing basis. It was a very bureaucratic, silent party, in the background. And then the party lost power. And then in the last two terms, the party has not really built out its political plank. What do we stand for? And then that vision has not been, it's one thing to have a vision that, okay, we stand for a plural, secular country. That maybe, let's say that's one vision. But that vision then has to be taken to the people, right? And that it's taken to the people through a range of programs. So where is that programmatic agenda that will take what is a rhetorical vision to the people in a manner that people are able to understand? Whereas BJP, if I'm a BJP supporter, right, and let's say I stand for it, if you say you're a BJP supporter, there's a very clear, I have some understanding that some Hindutva, nationalism, there is some understanding of what you would sort of stand for. And you would have ways of exercising what you stand for without necessarily engaging with the BJP's political organization. Right? If you're celebrating Diwali, you're suddenly becoming a BJP supporter, right? If you are standing up for your right to light firecrackers, go to the local temple, all of those things, suddenly you're becoming a BJP supporter. But if I'm a Congress party person, then how do I become a Congress party supporter? Only by saying, something against Modi. Only by, how do I exercise my political identity without necessarily only criticizing the government? And the party hasn't come out with that agenda. And it needs to. Right? Any political party must, in my mind, do at least three things. They must provide some sort of identity. If I'm a Congress party worker or a supporter or a leader, I stand for XYZ things. That should come through my association with the party. They must provide some sense of opportunity. That Congress party, if I'm a Congress party worker, if I'm a Congress party supporter, Congress party comes to power, these are the range of opportunities that will open up for me. Or even if I'm allied with the party, these are the range of opportunities that will open up for me. And third, they must provide a sense of community. right? That if I am a Congress party worker or if I'm a Congress party supporter, this is my community that I can engage with. Now, if on back of all of these three, I don't think that you can really come up with that this is what the Congress party worker or supporter gets. Right? In terms of opportunity, you just see some young person, they're bombarded with these really aspirational images. And you tell them that हम आपको 3,500 रुपये unemployment allowance देंगे. It's not going to get that person excited.
Yeah.
Right? The BJP, on the other hand, may not be doing anything. I remember going to one of those Mazdoor mandis, and you know what a Mazdoor mandi is, right? Where
Hire
basically
people by the hour, right?
unorganized workers,
Unorganized,
Mazdoor, they get together in the morning in these like places, and then they wait for people to hire them for some ad hoc jobs. I remember going to a Mazdoor mandi, and I did this only because I wanted to test what people were thinking. And I went, and there was one young man, very well dressed.
Yeah.
And he really did not look like someone who would have to be at a Mazdoor mandi. Very well dressed, looking very sharp. And I asked him, I was just having a conversation with him. He obviously was not called into the Mazdoor mandi. He was not, he didn't get a job. And I asked him, and he turned, obviously he was a BJP supporter, and then I asked him that why are you so supportive? Because clearly, despite your education and everything, you're standing in the Mazdoor mandi. And he said कि मोदी जी digital India करेंगे. This was when that digital India, right?
Yeah.
I asked him what does digital India mean. He didn't really know. But that sense of that expansive vision, some sense of escapism or opportunity, कुछ bombastic सा था which appealed to him. If now he had been told that what you will get is only 3,500 unemployment allowance or some sort of rhetoric, right? Negative rhetoric against that the BJP is doing XYZ, that they are beholden to a couple of corporations. I don't know if that necessarily would have taken that young man in. So that sense of opportunity, right? That aspiration, that bigness. Or you ask them ki, what are you getting out of the BJP, and they will say कि Modi ji ने India का नाम बड़ा कर दिया है.
So common, yeah.
This is something you will hear, and I've seen this. Every time I travel, I make it a point to go and talk to some people that either at a chai ki thadi or somewhere, right? And this is an answer. What does it give you? It's irrelevant, right? But they want to feel that as an Indian, that he has helped increase national pride, and somehow it's reflecting in their own personal pride. Right now, if you, on the other hand, if you are now not only are they feeling some sense of reflected glory in this national pride, real or alleged, if then you were to say that if you were to speak against it without necessarily presenting an alternative vision, it's not likely to fly very much. And that is what I feel is happening. That because we are not providing that alternate source of pride, an alternate vision, an alternate way of moving forward, but we are only speaking against this, which for whatever reason has permeated to the ground and has had some positive resonance. Sometimes I feel that it only irritates people. This negativity, and I don't mean to say it's negative. It may be a very real critique. It may be a very substantive critique. But people sometimes get irritated. Also because it comes out as too much noise. So it's important as a political party, for a national political party, to have that sense of national ambition, national vision, and then to be able to provide that identity, that community, and that opportunity. Otherwise, I feel that it's going to struggle. At the state units, this will flow down, but I think this is largely a problem at a national level.
No, I think it's a super important thing to say. I've seen so many of these interviews where people praise Modi's foreign policy, and sometimes it's so stark because they're clearly living in very poor conditions, right?
घर में घुस के मारा.
Right? So, and he would be living in a kacha hut. I mean, I've literally actually, while reporting, seen this in 2019. That, to some extent, I think people assume that there is a caste and class sort of slope to nationalism, and I think that's true. I think there might be those things, But I actually saw examples of backward class Dalits, poor people who were so excited about Balakot, right? And it was clear that, I mean, even they realized that it's not going to literally materially affect them. But I think the counter to that is anyway they're going to be materially affected. So it's not like it's, at the end of the day, it's not like the Congress come back to power, they're going to become rich overnight, right? So they have what they have, and that is exciting for them. And I saw this in, for example, I saw this in Bengal, which is not seen to be a nationalist in a way that the Hindi belt is stereotypically. But I saw this. There was a sense of excitement amongst a lot of, especially young men, because I mean, I guess there's a gender angle to this also, which I think should be unpacked. But especially amongst young men, I saw this that
Yeah.
there was this thing that there was this masculinity, there was this bravado, there was this machiness that Modi bought. One thing that I would like to also get into, Ruchi, is what you're saying. The false that you said about the Congress, that it's failing to push out a positive ideology, to me is almost reflective at a much larger scale of Indian liberals overall, of which the Congress is, if that is a word you would want to use, of the Congress is a subset, right? At the end of the day, and as opposed to things like religious nationalism, which are so attractive for young people, especially young men. In fact, one of the odd things that I find nowadays is very often, and we'll come to that. We'll come to the north-south thing. Very often, one of the hard counters to the BJP, it really actually scares the BJP in some ways, is to do things like linguistic nationalism, which are these, this right versus right kind of thing, setting up a cage match of one right-wing ideology, one identitarian ideology versus another identitarian ideology. To some extent, even caste census is a version of that, right? You're taking up an identity which is being suppressed, which is being backward, and you're setting it against a Hindutva ideology, and you're hoping that the big chunk of OBC votes, which is literally half of India, will switch votes. So why is liberalism so bad at this? Is this how liberalism is? It's like a weak mass ideology, or are Indian liberals doing something wrong?
So I think liberalism is not actually a mass ideology in that sense, right? Liberalism initially started as a way of managing diversity in countries, right? So religious wars are happening, and how do you sort of keep them together? But the way it has progressed, liberalism ultimately valorizes the individual too much, right? And then because the individual has to be supreme, and by too much, I don't mean that individuals should not have autonomy, but I'll go down. Because individuals have to be supreme, then all manners of authority, collective authority, have to be weakened, right? So you can't have religious authority, you can't have community authority, you can't have all other ways of authority have to be weakened, and liberals primarily rely on institutions for that collective authority.
Right.
So till the time that liberals were in political power, right, and they had the institutions of state at their disposal, they were able to propagate what they believed in and their policies and their ideology.
The fact that they want a mass ideology wasn't a hindrance, because they had the institution of the state
to be
help
able to
push that.
propagate.
Right.
And I think that it was justified because the institutions of state came on the back of democratic elections and so on and so forth. But the moment liberals have lost power, right, and they no longer have access to institutions of the state, so whether it's the judiciary or it's the actual government, it's the other ways of they're really struggling, because there's this idea that you must weaken all other authorities, right? You must weaken religious authority and you must valorize the individual, because religious authority, there'll obviously be certain things, right? The moment you have collective authority, the individual, the marginal individual will obviously get suppressed a little bit, right? So now suddenly liberals have no way of exercising collective authority, and because the individual has been valorized to the extent that what you are thinking, what you are feeling, your own personal desires, and it may not be a logical. It's just become, liberalism plus capitalism to sort of coexist as a package, right? So now the individual has been valorized to an extent that society has become so atomized. It's impossible for us to be able to do things in a collective manner. And there is no moral core that would say ki these people should listen to this person because we have said that you can't, right? This person does not have all authority has to be consistently legitimated through some sort of participatory voluntary mechanism. वो possible नहीं होता है. If you want to run a very large organization, and if I'm constantly thinking that I'm going to run some sort of a plebiscite constantly, and everyone will constantly affirm their belief in what we are trying to do, you will never get anything done because that process is so difficult. So what do liberals, the liberals then rely on media, liberals will rely on social media, एक hashtag होगा, and hashtags can be useful only to accumulate a protest. But that consensus building, that organization building, that liberalism, I think, is very poorly structured to do that because it has valorized the individual too much. We are thinking that individuals this is one of my pet peeves. I go for a walk in the park and there are always these people who are doing these acupressure exercises by, very noisily they're clapping. And that clap, the sound goes, it drips through the morning quiet and it really irritates me. But liberalism will be everyone has the right to do everything, right? There can be no authority because liberalism relies too much on individual discipline. But mass individual discipline आता थोड़े ना है. You need some structure of authority to be able to get that kind of mass discipline, and liberalism does not have that. So I feel like liberalism really struggles in that sense to do any kind of collectivization which is required, especially to be able to fight elections. The second place where I feel that liberalism struggles, it really does not provide a sense of identity. I can say I'm a liberal and go to Khan Market and feel like it provides me an identity, right? I'm a Khan Market liberal, that's my identity and I'll be quite happy about it. But if let's say you're one young person in Aligarh or Ajmer or some chotu town somewhere, right? And everyone else around you is relying on some identity which is given to them. Let's say an identity which is either their caste or some other identity, some social identity. And then this young person will want to come up with some view and say, I'm a liberal. He's going to struggle to be able to exercise that identity in a way which affirms it, right? I get affirmation for my liberal identity, but a young person in some Mufassal town will not get affirmation for his or her liberal identity.
In fact, I would struggle to even talk about liberalism in Hindi or Bengali. Like, I'm not really. What is the Hindi word for liberalism?
Yeah.
So I am not, my Hindi and Bengali is not great, but I don't know it. But I know for example, Hindi and Bengali word for communism, which is also Western ideology, but somehow it got mass thing in a way that for some reason liberalism didn't.
Because communism is a collective ideology, right? They're designed to be collective.
And by definition.
But liberalism is not. Liberalism has designed itself around institutions of the state in everyone. So in elite towns, we can be liberal, right? You're listening to podcasts which are some American guys podcast, or you and I are talking in English, even though we decided at the beginning that हम English में बात करेंगे, but we lapsed into English, right? But it doesn't provide that sense of identity. So which is why,
Can you connect liberalism? So one of the interesting things that I see, for example, about American identity is that there is, I think, a liberal American identity where it's connected to, I don't know, their nationalism is connected, or at least part of their nationalism is connected to liberalism. Liberalism is seen as an American export, almost like the way communism once was for the USSR. Is there something that Indians can try to do? Like, could there be an Indian liberal nationalism?
No, but there is, right? The Congress party was supposed to be that. Right? So I think the way to do that would be that if I am a Congress person, the way to provide identity to that young boy or girl in a Mufassil town would be through the Congress identity or whichever liberal party, but it has to be on the back of an organization. To think that first of all, India is not a liberal country in that sense, right? We have tolerance, but we don't have that understanding of liberalism in the sense of free speech and all of those other core tenets of liberalism. So the way to provide that identity is on the back of an organization. That organization which espouses certain liberal ideals. So if I'm a Congress part, I can say I'm a Congress person,
Right.
or I'm an XYZ organization that stands for liberalism. This person is deriving his or her identity from that organization. That organization stands for liberal values. That's an easy communication. But अगर हम ये expect करेंगे कि that young person will be able to argue for free speech, and that free speech should extend to, let's say, whether or not it was said as immaterial, कि भारत तेरे टुकड़े होंगे, and that young person should be able to argue that no, it doesn't matter, the state is strong enough to be able to withstand these things. It's impossible. You're basically setting up this kid for failure.
Right.
So liberalism, I don't think it cannot become a mass ideology, but liberalism can become a mass ideology only on the back of an organization, which in my mind, just given the nature of mass organizations, will have to be a political party. So that political party provides identity, it provides community, it provides that organizational strength, and it also stands for liberal principles.
So when you're speaking of Congress liberalism, one of the things that kind of struck me recently is that the Congress has taken up a couple of interesting planks. One is the caste census, and the other is, I mean, that's not a Congress plank, but some leaders have spoken about it, a north-south divide. To some extent, the Congress High Command has also sort of lightly touched on it. Rahul Gandhi said India is a union of states and so on and so forth, which of course is technically completely correct. India is a union of states, it's mentioned in the constitution, but you realize the charge that repeating stuff like this gives when it comes to political narratives. Neither of them, I mean, in my opinion, are very liberal or, part of a liberal framework, in an ideological sense of the word. They're more identitarian, and you might like them or dislike them depending on your POV, but they are identitarian planks. For example, I think with the caste census, the Congress hopes that India's vast middle OBC segment would sort of see this as an ideological lodestar rather than Hindutva, which is where many of them are right now. How do you unpack that when it comes to calling the Congress a liberal party?
See, I think there are 2 points to be made here. First, that you can be a liberal party and you can still pick up a campaign, right, which does not necessarily have to be very liberal. Campaigns are more ad hoc, and there could be a range of issues that you run your campaign on. And they don't always have to be within the rubric of liberalism. That's the first part. So simply running a campaign does not make you an anti-liberal party or a non-liberal party. Second, identity is very much a liberal framework. If you see, virtually all liberals, across the world, they've gone down an identity plank, but in a very sort of niche identity, right? The more niche the identity becomes, the more liberal plank it becomes in that woke sense. So it's not also that an identity based campaign cannot be a liberal campaign. I think the problem that I see with the caste census or the North-South, which is not a party plank, the Congress party plank, is that if you're a national party, then you need to have a framework where everyone can subscribe to it, right? So even if you're wanting to run a campaign on social justice, and that is your very deeply held belief, and it is a deeply held belief, it still has to be articulated in a manner where you're not exacerbating cleavages, because everyone should be able to subscribe to a national party. And a national party must always have a national integration framework. It should not be trying to pit one identity against another identity. I think the feeling is that perhaps there is a communal polarization, but that's an 80-20 polarization, right? And that can still work electorally. And the feeling may be that you want to do some sort of a reverse polarization, a Mandal 2, which was, and that would somehow counter that polarization. But I feel that in going down this path, there are two problems. One is I feel that you may lose your inclusive status where everyone can ascribe to you. And a national party needs to be able to accrete different constituencies. And I feel like this kind of a polarization may reduce its and nationally inclusive status, right? The second thing I feel is that the medium is the message. The problem is not whether a corruption message is electorally resonant or not, or whether the social justice message or the caste census message is electorally resonant or not. The question always is this message credible coming from XYZ medium?
Right.
In a political party, personnel is policy and the medium is the message. It's worth asking if this is the best message coming from the Congress party platform, or whether the Congress party is suited for other kinds of messaging. And that is something that I feel should be checked. And there are ways of doing this, right? There are ways of both checking whether a message is resonating on the ground, and do you have the organization to be able to take the message on the ground, and is the message coming as a credible message from coming from your particular organization. Corruption has been obviously very electorally resonant, but the corruption message usually is some new party that comes out that doesn't have a lot of history of anti-incumbency or having run the government. Once you've been in power, let's say 50 years out of the 75 years, let's say you've been in power, for you to run a campaign which is about corruption may be a little challenging. To run a campaign which talks about that power has vested in the hands of a few may be a little bit more challenging, because you have been the repository of power in the first place, right? Even though you may be very well-meaning. So that's the second. The North-South thing, which is not the party's official plank, but I think it's just... you don't want to go down that path, right? You don't want to go down a path where suddenly you're playing up divisions between some states, or you're either saying that these states are contributing more to the tax, to the central tax pool, but they're getting less, or that this is a particularly progressive set of states and these are not progressive set of states. As a national party, no leader within your party, even if they're coming from the southern states, should be allowed to run this kind of a messaging ever, because I think it just dilutes your own stature as a national party.
It's one thing for a state party to do it because they're not going to fight in other states.
Precisely.
Right.
But even for them, right, I don't think, why would you, to derive identity as an Indian, you don't want to suddenly pick up. You can say that I'm a whatever state I am, and you can be very proud of that identity, but there's some value that we derive from being part of this country, right? And it's a really illustrious country. Look at our history. We are punching above our weight on so many issues. Why would you want to dilute yourself to one state? And why would you not want to feel brotherhood with your people in Bihar and UP and Madhya Pradesh? Why would you not want to have that sense of brotherhood?
I think so. Of course, that's a theoretical argument. I think what state parties look at it practically is that 80-20 thing that you sort of pointed out. So it's one way to build a local majority, for better or for worse, which ideologically counters Hindutva in some way. It's not probably the best way to do it, but at that moment, since nothing else is working, and I think just doing welfare by itself is not enough.
Yeah.
You need an ideological sort of, overhanging sort of, that thing. So I think that is where that comes in.
But the caste census is not an 80-20 thing.
Exactly. So caste census doesn't even fit into that framework actually. So
It
which is
doesn't
the
fit
interesting
in the
thing.
80-20 thing. You can stand for social justice, but it will have to have a more inclusive framework. Also, the caste census, the BJP is a far more OBC party than the Congress party, right?
That's true.
So
One of
I
its
don't
great
know.
successes, actually.
And also, if you've now taken out all the non-dominant OBC castes out, and you've sort of accommodated them within your own organization, and they've also become a little bit Hindutva, then it's worth asking how much salience does this message have. I'm not speaking against this message, but it's worth asking whether this message is the best message for our platform.
So I'm going to end where we started, Ruchi. I'm going to end on again on political parties. Do you think over the past few decades, let's take a time span of 50 years, political parties in India become weaker? Were they stronger, say, under Indira Gandhi and Nehru as a whole?
That political parties have become weaker?
Have become weakened? Has the organization become weakened? Or that's wrong, actually, they're more stronger, we're not seeing it.
So I think earlier, as parties have fractured, and you have many more political parties. So I don't know if you can necessarily say that political parties have become weaker, because earlier there was just the CPM, right, in Bengal, but now you have CPM and then you have TMC, etc. So there's clearly has been some kind of democratization, because even the very fact of fragmentation means there's been some kind of democratization. Right, the fact that you have now mandal-based parties, so there has been some increased democratization. So I don't know if you can necessarily say that political parties have become weaker. You have more political parties now. Were political parties strong earlier? It depends on how you measure strength of a political party. Are you measuring strength in terms of a political party's ability to effect its will on the state and capture state power? Certainly, some parties have attenuated in power, right? CPM itself is an example. The Congress party is an example, but the BJP is clearly now fusing the party and the state and the sort of the community in some ways. In Kerala, you can see that there is a lot of party community sort of intermixing. I don't know if that's. So I would hesitate to really make any kind of answer on whether political parties have weakened. What has happened, though, I think that the political process has certainly, I don't know, weakened, because I wasn't there at that time when it was at its height. I wasn't born, but I think the political process has certainly become a lot less representative, and I think the anti-defection law is certainly very responsible for this. See, now what has happened is that the anti-defection law has not strengthened political parties.
Can you tell us what is the anti-defection law for listeners?
Yeah, so the anti-defection law is basically, if you're a member of a political party, you're either an MLA or an MP, an elected representative of a political party. If you vote against your party whip, if the party issues a whip and you vote against the party whip, right, then you are seen to be a defector, and then you lose your membership, and you lose you cease to be a member of the party. And I think that what that has done is that it has not strengthened political parties. It has strengthened and it has helped leadership of political parties to consolidate their power within the party. And what that has done is it has made the political process completely unrepresentative. Now you can only vote for one party or the other party, but you can't vote for your elected representative and then use your elected representative to be able to agitate on issues that matter to you. And that has also made the political process so defunct. Earlier, let's say there could be, what is the idea? I don't know where I read it, but there's this idea of moving majorities. That on X issue, there may be some set of people who come together. On Y issue, another set of people come together. And that's the democratic process, that you're able to have different majorities on different issues. But now with the ADL, with the anti-defection law, it has all congealed into political parties. So you cannot have a horizontal horizontal affiliation where, let's say, 100 MPs from one political party join up with another 100 MPs from another political party, and to be able to push forward one issue. So all these private members bills, etc., they become completely useless, right? Because there can be no horizontal affiliation. And where there can be no horizontal affiliation, even civil society then struggles. Because civil society, if you are a member of a civil society organization, your only way to get anything passed is to go straight to the party leadership to try and lobby with the party leadership. You can't actually try and cobble together a majority through your local MPs or your local MLAs at the state level. Right? So it has also weakened the political process outside, not just internally, but also outside. If you have any concerns, if you have any grievances with your party, you are not able to run them through your political leadership, right? Because the political leader will decide, and they will say yes or no. So it's become very, very top down. I argued earlier that political parties are actually top down, but there's also a dialectic, right? There's a bottom up mechanism and there's a top down mechanism, and it has to speak. There has to be a back and forth between the two. And the anti defection law has just completely choked off that process. And we are seeing that it's not actually strengthened the political. If you have enough power, and we've seen, right, the BJP is able to, by what is that Hindi phrase, that calm down, some whatever it is. Yeah, right. कुछ ना कुछ करके you are able to cobble together the 2/3 majority that's required as part of the anti-defection law. So it's not strengthened political parties. It strengthened the control of a leader. And because the party itself, also what's happening is that all sorts of, your MLAs and your MPs, just see, you're only about 4,000 MLAs in the entire country, right? But because you have completely reduced their stature so much, the kind of people, a political party that's aiming to represent crores, even at a state level, if you come to power, you are aiming to represent 5 to 7 crores of a population, right?
It's a big-sized country, basically.
On the back of, what, 200 odd MLAs. Yeah. But wo MLAs, such few numbers representing this huge thing, you still have to, you can't even trust them to stand for what they are saying they will stand for. You have to collar them physically, right? And then keep them in resorts, you have to confiscate their phones, etc. So it just shows that what has happened is that political parties, by doing this, they've consolidated control over a set of people who are not able to even hold on to their own word. And then obviously, it's reflecting in the political process and the quality of the representative process in our country.
On that cheery note, Ruchi, we will end this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Ruchi. This was a very informative and very insightful podcast. We're going to drop in the link for Ruchi's Substack in the description to this episode in case you guys want to check it out if you haven't already. If you like the work that Scroll does, I would urge you to contribute. Go to scroll.in/contribute so that we can continue to do the journalism that we do in a country where it's often not happening very much. This is Shoaib, Daniyal. Thank you for listening to Scroll Ideas.